Thank you so much for everybody making the trip. It's so nice to see everybody coming back to life. And yes, Tennessee, I can tell you all about your cloud journey and how desperately I want you to advance it since you've been a client of ours for so long. But one of the things that's interesting, so first let me say I'm Mark Becci. I'm with Oracle. I'm our Director of Statewide Strategies, and my job is to know a little about what everybody in this room is doing as far as their cloud journey, what they're running for ERP. So once upon a time, I worked for the governor of Colorado, and I sat in a chair similar to yours, except way down the rung. I was just a kind of a political hack. But I accidentally got a job in 1998 with J.D. Edwards, and they got bought by PeopleSoft and then bought by Oracle. So 24 years later, I'm still faking it until I make it. I'll let you know if that ever happens. But one of the things that's been really interesting to me is 10, 12 years ago, everybody started talking about cloud. And I would be in a room like this, and somebody would present, and it would be a vendor like me. And what I discovered is that there really wasn't a rational definition of what cloud really was, and it was really a vendor telling you what their capacity to go ahead and host something or put something out there on the internet and everything. So I thought we would revisit the subject here this morning, and the object of the exercise for this is for you guys to talk with one another about the things that are driving your cloud journey, where you are in your cloud journey, the urgency, if there is any, in your cloud journey. But I thought I would go back to a little funny, but it really does spawn the question of what's different now than it was when I started 24 years ago, or when many of you started in your computing, whether it was from the green screen to the client server and now to cloud. So one of the things I wanted to share with you was just the complete paradigm shift in your mindset when it comes to cloud computing. No matter what you do, every single person, whether you're an administrator, whether you're the CIO, whether you're the business leader, all of these folks need to fundamentally say, how is this different for me? And all the roles do change, because you are adapting to technology for the first time instead of trying to force feed into the technology available to you. You have so much more flexibility. IT and business collaborate in a much different way. That's really good. We're freeing up so much of what IT does to allow business leaders to allow IT to drive systems further and do even more collaboration and just foster a different relationship. The other thing is enablement. When you go into a cloud environment, you're able to take everybody in your organization and count them in early. Not, we're going to go implement this solution over here, and in 6 months after design is done or when we're ready to flip the switch, we'll teach you what you're doing. Everybody can get in from the outset to get enabled, and everybody takes on different, more enhanced roles. So first of all, so how do you guys define cloud? So raise your hands or just start barking out, because I'm going to start calling on people. So so how do you define cloud now? When somebody says, oh, well, cloud, what does that mean to you? Is that your infrastructure? Is that some platform you're on? Is that some bit of functionality you put out there? Anyone? Okay. Back here? Just off-site, out of sight, out of mind. Misty? And what does he want to happen in Miles City right now? Well, there was something that was off-site that's going away. Excellent. Okay. So the next thing is, and really what everybody was, when I was listening to everybody 12 years ago, when I was like, it sounds like hosting to me. I'm from Colorado, and all I know is my friends at CGI have been hosting the state of Wyoming for 25 years. So as far as I'm concerned, they've been on the cloud forever. But really what you discover is it a platform, is it your infrastructure, or is it your complete software as a service? So anyone, when you think of it, when you think about it, is it platform, is it infrastructure, or is it the whole software thing? What's any examples of somebody that says, yep, our first step in cloud was to go to a platform, to go to our friends at Azure or AWS? Or was it, God, I've got this infrastructure stuff. I need to take care of that. This is a hassle. Anyone? You're nodding your head. Okay. Yes? Okay. So we're finding at Oracle, obviously, we've got our fingers in every pie since we do a little something of everything. And so some of you are gladly our clients. Some of you are involuntarily our clients. We got carried in. And so there really is a ton of flexibility out there. And so I would encourage you guys, when you're looking at, it's great to look at software and say, all right, well, I'll just take care of everything with software as a service, because here comes the infrastructure, here comes the platform, it's all taken care of. But I'm curious to see, what's the biggest barriers? Everyone, 6, 8, 10 years now, people have said, oh, well, we've got a cloud-first strategy. And it's like, well, you got a cloud-first strategy if you don't have the capacity, you don't have the capabilities, you don't have the thought structure of, well, all right, well, we'll go here first. So a lot of states were like, well, you got to prove to me that there's not a solution in the cloud, or there's not a rational option to go to the cloud before you do that. And so there's a ton of cloud-first states that are still sitting in their infancy. So let me ask you this. Who thinks where are you on your cloud journey as far as it still from a state perspective in its infancy? Are we toddlers now? Are we teenagers? Where do you think we are in the grand journey? Ask the guy who's got 21 states running PeopleSoft who are going nowhere fast, except our friends in Montana who are doing some really neat things. So where do we think we are in our collective cloud journey? How far along? Yep.
What I'll offer. I can tell you that NASCIO is actually working on a framework to measure each state's maturity in its cloud journey. And so that's a study that's just come out. So that's something, definitely talk with your IT folks about that. Ask them about the cloud maturity model. And obviously it'll be a way to bring an objective measurement to what you're doing. But I would say from a maturity standpoint, I think folks have to look at, do you actually have a plan that you are measuring your progress against? Because if you don't, then we're probably in our infancy. If you have a plan and you can measure your progress against it, and people are being held accountable to their commitments, then I think you're growing in your maturity. And it's not just putting stuff up in the cloud, right? You can get stuff to the cloud, but the cloud can be really expensive. Things to think about as you're moving towards the cloud are not just all of the operational reasons why it might be a good idea. You can, you pay for it. It's metered, right? I pay for what I use. I don't pay for what I don't use. But if you leave it turned on, you will get billed, right? So I guess I would offer it probably varies, state by state, depending upon what they're doing. As we're navigating our stuff, we set our plans over a 2 to 3 year period, and of course we went past some of our targets but we keep pushing at it. And I would say we're probably about 90% complete in terms of the initial lift.
Gotcha. So, so show of hands, how many people think that they have a plan beyond a declaration that, well, we're all cloudy now? And a show of hands again, how many really think that you really do a full cost accounting in that plan to go ahead and chart it out? Because I know 10 years ago when we started looking at this, and even from the software that I was responsible for, I was like, you know, you're going to get into year 5. And when you write that check in year 5, had you done a traditional implementation and done it right, now all of a sudden in year 5, 6, 7 in those out years, you in theory would have paid more, you know, into year. So I couldn't make something pencil out over a 10-year period because it just got too expensive in those out years. But how many of us actually had a flawless, on time, on budget implementation and then were able to drive a system further? So anybody really getting in and trying to do an exhaustive full cost accounting when you do replace a system, or is it just like, you know what, I've got a hardware contract. I don't want to replace this hardware, so that I'm just going to go ahead and that's going to prompt my move. Or they're telling me this is nifty and I've got these 5 FTEs that go away. I'll just put it out there. So or do we really feel like we're doing real in-depth full cost accounting to really chart this out? Or is it just one of these things that's prompting you to do it and that's where the marketplace is going? Any thoughts on that?
It's interesting. What we've been doing is looking, when does the hardware reach end of life and kind of timing to move to the cloud. It's been extremely helpful looking at these services to smooth the costs over time so there isn't a big budget hit when you have to refresh hardware. And then it's a long strategy with our enterprise architects looking at how do you get there. How do you get old platforms refactored into Azure or Amazon? There's other options too, even the ability to slide workloads up in terms of VMware software, a great software that simulates Windows servers in the cloud. So there are a lot of options. What's interesting for me, having programmed way back on mainframes, now you have to look back at the accounting again, and as a gentleman from Arizona said, you can't have runaway transactions. You got to look at your storage, look at those costs over time, and make sure that you're being efficient with all the resources that you're using in the cloud, because those costs could run away on you.
Gotcha. So now you're doing evaluations on that side. So on the business side, when somebody's just like, well, I want this new functionality, or I want to be able to go anywhere, compute at any time on any device, so on and so forth. You guys finding that this relationship that's being described here now is now all of a sudden IT and business have no choice. Your drivers from an IT perspective could be much different than obviously the drivers as a business perspective. Has that changed, or is that just the same old thing that, you know, the CIO is over here and the business is over here? Do you find cloud really breaking that down and fostering better conversations, or is it just different parts and pieces? And really the same conversation IT's had with the business side for forever. Chair?
So since I get to lead the IT conversation with, a number of parts of our business, I would say, yeah, no, it absolutely changes it, right? Because what cloud brings in terms of some of the things you've mentioned, being able to start small, start quickly. I don't have to go and do a procurement of servers and rack them and configure them and come back to you, weeks, if not months later and say, okay, now let's talk. We're able to, I can literally, in a couple of hours, probably come back to you and say, okay, this thing is ready to start going. And then we can start, it's sort of like, what's the, you'll hear your IT guys say minimum viable product, which is what is the smallest thing that we can do that is useful and meaningful and delivers value to the business, and we can build on top of that. Right, so we have new starting points. The other thing that cloud has brought, and this is not necessarily good side of it, but it's like the business can go around me with a credit card or a P card, right? Sign up for their account and they can get what they want. Now that's obviously there's procurement issues and that kind of thing, but that's the reality, that there are technically capable people in the business that can go out and they will find solutions and they will stand them up. And so I'll say that from an IT guy's perspective, it's my responsibility to be engaged with the business about, okay, how do we help you move faster, get the solutions that you need, and be agile with you. And I think that's where you're kind of leading the conversation as to what, that's a key component of cloud. And back to your previous question, I'd like to ask the question, did anyone really have a full cost accounting of what they were doing previously? Because as navigating this in Arizona, I have people come to me and they would say, "Oh, it's going to cost me more." And like, well, okay, but did you account for not just the server and the operating system and the maintenance and the rack space and the network and the facility, all the things, right, and the people, and were you actually was it serving you well? Was it being maintained? Was it continually being invested in? You talk about going out, the 6, 7, 8 years. That is beyond while yes, we can make things extend that far. That's not you should do that though.
Yeah.
And I think we frequently see that. I think we all have those applications that haven't been kept current, and now is a business risk because we haven't. I had a case where we were behind on a system. It would take us 2 years, because it was so heavily customized, it would take 2 years to upgrade it, which meant I could never actually catch up to a supported version of software. Right? That's the type of legacy technical debt that we carry. And one of the things that we get away from in adopting cloud services is these cloud service providers, they do all the updating for you, right? It's included in the service. And I think moving to that operational expense, now one of the things I hope you'll talk about is that transition from how do we navigate from a CapEx budgeting model to an OpEx budgeting model. That's a shift, and it's a healthy thing to go through.
Yeah, and that is one of the things. And you sit there in year 7, 8, and it's like, well, for heaven's sakes, how many people will have the same governor 7 years from now? Maybe Misty will, since you're in year 1. But when we look at that, it's two things. One, we've tried to encourage people, from selfish Oracle ERP standpoint. It's like, well, for heaven's sakes, let's move over into the OpEx side, so we're not sitting here with this great big giant $50 million ask on the cap side and never getting there. And then to develop the consistency. And one of the things that JR pointed out was now one of the things that's truly changed is with a quarterly update and your cloud provider doing everything on the backside, now you can innovate. It's never too late because you're not the one frozen in your customized thing that it's all I can do to keep the lights on, let alone drive the software. Once upon a time, I accidentally made a joke in front of a whole bunch of people saying functionality in your software that you never use is not a differentiator. So we can talk about all of these wonderful things when we try to do a full cost accounting and say, all the bells and whistles and all these other things. Well, I remember back in the day, we could do 100 things for you. You only have the capacity to do 17. So all of these other things, they might have been nifty, but if you're never using them, and so now you have that menu. Those items are still there, and you can activate those things over time and quarter over quarter. So it's a continual, nonstop process instead of getting stuck in these fits and starts. And so hopefully cloud solutions, whether ERP solutions like we sell, or your infrastructure, any of these things, a growing, living, evolving thing, allowing you to innovate on a continual basis. The final thing I wanted to bring up is security. One of these things, a lot of the barriers to the cloud initially were, well, if I don't have my arms around this isn't in my 4 walls, and I don't have my security wrapped around it, well then, where are we? So can anybody speak to the element of security on whether they feel more or less secure going and farming out a major function now into the cloud? Anyone feeling like they're more secure than they were back in the day when you were controlling your own environments?
Well, so what I would say about the vast majority of these cloud providers, right? They invest more in their infrastructure and their security on an annual basis than you're probably going to see roll through your budget for many years. So now it doesn't mean that they are, like, you still have the ability to make that environment insecure. But in working with cloud providers, like they have worked with enough states, they've worked with federal governments, they know how to secure their environments, and in working in partnership, and that's a key thing, is don't just go this on your own, but work with them, and they can help you comply with pretty much any regulatory requirements that you have.
Yep, gotcha. So I was in Seattle at NASCIO last week, and one of the things we talked about, I was locked in a room with CISOs, so every single person, just like this room, 10 times smarter than me. But they all said, yes, security to a given extent. It's only a matter of time. You shall be, you shall be vulnerable in some way, shape, or form. But what it is when it finally happens, can you control it? Can you isolate it? Can you minimize the damage and lower your own risk by saying, if somebody did get in here, how much damage could they do, and what can I do to make sure that that damage is as small as possible? So the last thing, I think we're probably pretty much close to time. One of the things that I've learned in the new paradigm is it's the three-legged stool. You absolutely have to. We used to sell software and say, here is, here's Deloitte, here's Accenture, here's your integrator. And no matter how hard your software provider tried, you're still running your implementation for 1.5 years, 2 years. And when there was a problem or something like that, well, then you call back to the software company. But now it's absolutely imperative that the software provider, the system integrator, and the client are in the room at the same time. An example, and my friends at CGI, at Workday, everybody has models like this, so this is not necessarily a differentiator. But the cloud environment has mandated that we as Oracle or any other provider now have to be joined in lockstep at every single step of the way. So we have personnel that are at the table. I've been on a call for one of our clients twice a week for 6 months, and they've been live for 4 months now. And that just wasn't something that we had done before. So I'd really encourage you a couple of things. One, to make sure that the three of you are in constant contact, that you invite that software provider in there, that you don't let these territorial games start. The other thing is, and it's along with the security, the functionality, a whole number of things, is it is a service that's being provided for you. And a lot of people would say, here's your SLA. As long as I'm telling you, we're signing on the dotted line, and I'm going to provide this service for you, you don't need to know what's in the black box. You don't need to know. But what's in there, you really should investigate much deeper than you would think to find out what is under the covers. Because your software provider or your infrastructure provider or your platform provider is managing multiple relationships across the board. And just as we just said, 7 years from now, we can't speak to anything 7 years from now. Well, how in the world is your software provider going to guarantee you that 7 years from now, their contractual relationship with the platform provider is the same? Is that going to change? What's going to happen on the technology? So really getting in and understanding those parts and pieces as far as where those third parties are. What enables this whole nifty thing that they're showing me? So I hope a little of this was helpful to get the party started this morning. And anything else anybody has to close with? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.